Welcome to the Recovery Cast, brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private.
Hello again. My name is Oliver and I'm a former addict in recovery. Welcome back to another episode of the Recovery Cast brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private. The Recovery Cast is a podcast created by people in recovery from addiction for people in recovery from addiction. There are many definitions of addiction, but we keep it simple. Addiction to us is when people use alcohol, drugs, or certain behaviours repetitively to their detriment, basically when it's a problem for them and their families. Therefore, an addict is not necessarily someone using a needle in a dark laneway, and an alcoholic is not necessarily a homeless man in a park. Recovery for us means using an active daily process or program to deal with alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder, or other behavioural addictions. People in recovery are committed to complete abstinence. This daily process is as important to being able to live normal lives as daily dialysis is for people with kidney problems. This podcast is meant as a support tool for those in recovery. I myself am a recovering drug addict. However, each day we will focus on a different perspective of recovery. Everyone who participates in the podcast is in an active recovery program. We are not affiliated with any one recovery methodology and will focus on a variety of different types of recovery programs, including 12-step recovery such as Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, and other things like Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, Recovery Dharma, Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, and more. And a quick disclaimer, this podcast is intended to be informative. A podcast alone cannot support or maintain your sobriety and recovery, so we suggest it only as one component of a daily recovery routine. For more information, please go to www.rehab.melbourne. Now, we have an interesting episode planned. I would like to talk about the reading for November 16th from the Just for Today Narcotics Anonymous Daily Readings book, and it is entitled Alone No More. We gradually and carefully pull ourselves out of the isolation and loneliness of addiction and into the mainstream of life. Basic text, page 37. Many of us spent much of our using time alone, avoiding other people, especially people who were not using, at all costs. After years of isolation, trying to find a place for ourselves in a bustling, sometimes boisterous fellowship is not always easy. We may still feel isolated, focusing on our differences rather than our similarities. The overwhelming feelings that often arise in early recovery, feelings of fear, anger, and mistrust, can also keep us isolated. We may feel like aliens, but we must remember the alienation is ours, not NA's. In Narcotics Anonymous, we are offered a very special opportunity for friendship. We are brought together with people who understand us like no one else can. We are encouraged to share with these people our feelings, our problems, our triumphs, and our failures. Slowly, the recognition and identification we find in NA bridge the lonely gap of alienation in our hearts. As we've heard it said, the program works if we let it. Just for today, the friendship of other members of the fellowship is a life-sustaining gift. I will reach out for the friendship that's offered in NA and accepted. I love this reading. It's really interesting because it just reminds me of where I've come from in terms of my active addiction and how truly lonely that was. You know, I ended my addiction spending time by myself all the time. I would wake up, I would use, I'd go to sleep. And an ideal day for me was where I was not accountable for my actions, where I was just completely alone, able to do whatever I wanted, which was just to use and get and find the means to get and use more. And the reality of that is that it destroyed everything in my life, my career, and it made me incredibly mistrusting and fearful and angry. I didn't like other people, and I was incredibly misanthropic. I almost didn't like my own species because other people did things that I couldn't control, and I just wanted to control everything. So what that's like versus today for me, wow. It says in the reading, we pull ourselves out of that isolation and loneliness in addiction and into the mainstream of life. And I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the shared experience among many people who are in recovery, is that we slowly build our recoveries and we meet people and we begin to re-immerse ourselves into society as a whole. And that's irrelevant of what fellowship or program you work. I think when you are not doing that behaviour, that old behaviour of just constantly using and getting and isolating, that things return to normal. And the friendships that I have learned and developed in Narcotics Anonymous particularly, as well as recovery in general, have been amazing and very important to the maintenance of my recovery. It's commonly known that the opposite of addiction is connection, and there's that famous experiment called Rat Park where basically it's known that rats by themselves in a cage with access to drugs would use those drugs and until they died, basically. But if you put all the rats together in a great big cage with what is like a normal society and connection with other rats, you see that they don't actually become addicted to the drugs that are still available to them. And that's just it just sums up the fact that the opposite of addiction is connection. And in NA, I was welcomed into the fellowship, and I was given the opportunity to meet people with the same experience and share with them and open up. And that's what happened, is I slowly opened up and I was able to develop friendships that I still cherish today. And I can give some examples, but basically part of the fellowship, there's something called Outreach, which is basically where people from the city go to regional areas and attend meetings there and stay in that area. So I went to Shepparton and we rented the corner of a caravan park in a bunch of cabins, and we all hung out over the weekend and had barbecues and went swimming in the pool and trampolining and hiking and there's sing-alongs by the campfire. And then we also go to lots of meetings in that area. So I went to a bunch of Shepparton meetings and got to meet the local NA members and contribute to their fellowship there. And that's just, we get to hang out and connect with each other and be friends, and maintain those friendships. And, even just in my local area where I attend my meetings, I've met so many people. There are people from different backgrounds, but maybe similar ages or similar hobbies or similar experiences. And it's really easy to hit it off with people and make friendships. And the best thing about it is that drugs are never involved, because it's just not an option these days. And it's been a very safe place for me to make friends because of that. There was never anything that was triggering around me, and I was able to have these really great friendships. I've mentioned it before in another episode that another member took me snorkeling for the first time, and I got to really enjoy that, snorkeling through a school of salmon and seeing stingrays swimming around and banjo sharks and things like that just off Brighton Beach. And I would never have had that experience if it wasn't for the friendships that I've made in addiction. The growth that goes on is just phenomenal, where you get to see people and meet people and watch them grow as people as well at the same time that you're growing and learning and joining the mainstream of life, as the reading says, which is, it's fantastic. Now, I actually want to talk about the other thing that I want to talk about during this episode is working in recovery and how to go about, or how I went about. I can use my personal experience, how I went about establishing and reconnecting with my career in recovery versus what it was like in active addiction. So we'll talk a little bit about that after the break.
You're listening to the Recovery Cast by Hills and Rangers Private. Now playing daily on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. For more shows, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.
That's right. So you're on the Recovery Cast with Oliver, and I was just talking about what it looked like for me when I began to re-enter the workforce in my recovery. So I ended up in my active addiction. I ended up as a hospitality worker, and I was working in a job that I didn't particularly enjoy, but it was all that I could get, and I needed to, I had to work. And my addiction took me to a place where I was constantly getting in trouble at work. I was forgetting orders. I worked in a very successful hotel, and I was constantly being criticised at work for not pulling my weight and not doing the right stuff. And I was unwell at work from withdrawals, and it was just a horrible, horrible experience. And really, my career that I actually wanted to have as a musician was I'd well and truly, that had fallen by the wayside just because of the disaster that my active addiction brought. It destroyed my career, quite literally. So it got to the point where I needed to seek treatment, and I went into a rehabilitation centre and I quit that job. And when I left the rehab and I was established, I was 30 days clean, about a few weeks out of the rehab, and it got to the point where I thought, well, maybe I need to re-enter the workforce and start doing that stuff again, and make some money, and maybe it's time. Maybe I'm ready to be successful and work. And I'll start small. I'll do another hospitality job. So I got a job at a cafe, and because I was in early recovery, I was still very raw from my experiences, and I still hadn't really learned to deal with life on life's terms, as it's called. And it resulted in, even though I was clean, I actually still made the same mistakes. And the job, I was let go because of some misunderstandings. And I took that, rather than blaming other people or blaming myself or getting angry, I just thought to myself, well, you know what? Maybe it's not the right time for me to be working. Maybe this is the universe's way of telling me that I need to make recovery my full-time job. And you know what? That's what I did. I went to meetings every day. I attended the Rehab's Day program a couple of times a week. I had a strong program of exercise and meditation and prayer and yoga and time spent in nature. And I can tell you now, and I actually also made my third album in early recovery, it sounded very different to the first two, let me tell you. So I really made recovery my full-time job, and I did nothing but recovery stuff all the time. And I was very lucky to be able to do that because I was living with my mum at the time, and I was able to focus on that. That's not always the option for everybody. And I think what's really important is that we just work out what works for us and ask for help if we need it. I'm not telling anybody to do anything particularly just because I did something a certain way. No way. But for me, I had to make my recovery a full-time job, and I had to put my recovery first. I've heard it said in sort of recovery circles that whatever you put before your recovery will be the first thing you lose. If you don't put your recovery first, then you won't keep it. And my experience was that, I put my recovery first, and I'm still in recovery, and now the job has come along later, And I also had to just accept that, okay, well, maybe it's not the right time for me to be working. And, fast forward about 8 months of living at home, being on, a government sort of payment. I started teaching guitar again after a couple of years of really not doing that. And it got to the point where I had a job, and you know what, I still actually wasn't really where I wanted to be in my career. I thought, well, what am I going to do next? Am I going to go back and study and get more qualifications so I can get a better paying job? Or am I going to try and do music professionally again. What am I going to do? I don't know. You know, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and you know, in its own time, the correct opportunity that I realized that, you know, was the will of, you know, the universe or my higher power or whatever it is. It came up for me, and I just had to wait. It took a long time for me to actually get to that phase in my recovery where I was ready to start working seriously, and that was fantastic. Now, I'm fully aware that not everybody has that opportunity. You know, that would be nice, but unfortunately we can't always, you know, do that. People have to work, people have to do things, and some people have a really successful career that hasn't been affected by their addiction, but maybe they need to do something about their addiction in order to maintain their career. And that's this interesting. I'm reading from the Hills and Ranges private website here. In addition to residential treatment programs that proactively promote physical activities as a recovery methodology, we also cater to busy professionals who need to continue to work whilst in treatment. If you are a busy professional or run your own business and find it difficult to leave your business completely for 28 days or longer, then we can provide a safe and pragmatic environment where your business can be continued under supervision while you are receiving treatment in a safe environment. So I've never heard anything like that before. That's actually, when I read that, I was astounded that if you're a busy professional, that you can be supervised and allowed to continue to run your business whilst in treatment. I mean, that's amazing. And that's an option. You know, there are options out there, and Hills and Ranges Private is happy to accommodate. Everybody's got to find their own path, and whether you have to do that, or whether you stop working, or whether you work less, or, you know, whether you try to maintain the workload that you have still. The main thing is that, you know, for me at least, I just need to realize that no matter what comes up, I can stay clean through it all. So whether I'm working and something frustrating happens, I can still get through it clean. And whether you're in early recovery or whether you've got lots of recovery time up, you know, that's important. I'll let you in on something that happened to me today. This is actually take 2 of this episode, funnily enough. I was recording take 1. It was going really well, and my next door neighbours are having a renovation. Now, when I say renovation, it's probably more on the demolition side. From 7 a.m. until 3 p.m, we have concrete saws, jackhammers, excavators going just next door. So this is 2 meters away from my studio where I record these podcasts. And I was about 17 or 18 minutes into the podcast, and then, you know, lo and behold, the jackhammer starts up. And, you know, something like that in the past surrounding my work, I would have exploded. I would have gone next door and berated the poor tradies just trying to do their job, or I would have taken it out on my partner or something like that. You know, today it's a little bit different. I did send an email to the property manager saying, hey, the neighbours are having a renovation. Do you know what the time frame is going to be on it? And then I had to go to my mum's house. So I'm recording from my mum's living room. And, you know, that's just the sort of stuff that comes up in work. But the fact that I'm in recovery and I've learned all these skills to be able to deal with my addiction and deal with my feelings and not have to use through it, I can actually respond accordingly and appropriately. That's what it's all about in recovery, learning to live no matter what comes up in life, that, you know, we learn that we can stay clean no matter what, one day at a time. And if you have any questions about that, about whether you're a professional or whether you think you might need treatment, you can't do it anymore on your own, whatever it is, then jump on www.rehab.melbourne. The staff at Hills and Ranges Private are qualified to answer any questions that you may have. But in the meantime, that's another episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Just a bit of insight from my experience in recovery and working, having a career. We've got some interesting episodes coming up. We're hearing from another staff member at Hills and Ranges Private. on her experiences. But in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful day, whether you're working, whether you're not working. We'll see you next time on the Recovery Cast. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Recovery Cast. For more, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.